Hello there everybody, so this is going to be the last video that I'm going to make in this series where we've been looking at the conversation that's been going on between Sam Harris and Jordan Peterson, because I really want to get back to doing the normal XELASOMA stuff and get off this topic. So I just want to round this off by giving a few of my perspectives on public intellectuals in general and how they help or hinder the development of our perspectives. I want to basically put forward the notion that public intellectuals are a double-edged sword. On the one hand, they do contribute to the landscape of ideas, at least on the cultural level, and they can influence public perception to a certain degree. They enlighten us, they broaden our horizons, they challenge our preconceptions by exposing us to new ways of perceiving subjects in manners that we hadn't previously known before. In short, they are contributing to the development of our personal ideas space and the cultural ideas space. The other side to this, however, lies in the snares of dependency that can emerge between public intellectuals and their audiences, and how through an infatuation with their minds and their ability to use language, the ideological biases and shortcomings of the intellectual map onto our own intelligence and place constraints on the way that we relate to information. Deeper infatuation with the public intellectual creates a situation where we lose contact with that essential part of our anatomy to draw away and discover our own relationship to the ideas. We become lazy, ignorant of our own potential, and worst of all, the second-rate clones of another person's mind. Our minds become moulded into a caricature of the intellectual's worldview. We become the unconscious and uncritical automatons of ideas that we never stopped to fully comprehend, falsely believing that they must be correct, not because we've exercised our own way to that conclusion, but because we've been seduced into believing it. And in this age where information is being transmitted into receptive minds like never before, it's important that we understand our relationship to ideas and the people who espouse them. So let's begin this with a bit of personal history. I learn things in the same way that children learn, which is to say that I learn through immersion. I was always very average at school, even though I tried very hard at it. The problem wasn't dyslexia or a lack of inquisitiveness. It was down to the fact that different brains relate to information in different ways, and school systems try to educate different brains in the same way. I simply didn't possess a learning style that complemented a methodical, memorize, repeat style of process. In later life, I started to self-educate, as many people do, and this brought with it its own complications. Due to the nature of the subjects that I'm interested in, I have to go to books to find the quality of insight that I'm after. Books have always been a love-hate thing for me, however, because even though I like the long-term effects of reading, that of honing my mind and broadening my horizons, I've always intensely disliked the activity of reading. Learning through audio or video is naturally much more receptive to my audio-visual disposition. The downside of this, however, is that the quality, and especially the depth of the information, can't always be found in video form. So when I was beginning to develop XELASOMA, I would often listen to audio lectures or podcasts like Joe Rogan and hear the various minds speak about the topics that I was interested in. It was also around this time that I first discovered Jordan Peterson's lectures. This was at the time before his popularity, when his videos would be lucky to get over 1,000 views. And I was immediately captivated by his stratified delivery style and how he would call upon many different domains of knowledge in real time to compose the image of the topic that he was trying to elucidate. I wouldn't say anything dramatic like Jordan Peterson changed my life or anything like that, because by then I'd already been exposed to the works of people like Carl Jung and Joseph Campbell, Julian Jaynes, Rupert Sheldrake, Ian McGilchrist, and so on. So Jordan was really just another good addition to that existing stack. I've never brought into these people as idols or father figures that could tell me how everything worked. I've always been much more focused on following my own path in life, and therefore interpret any infatuation with an individual or single set of ideas as counterproductive to those aims. There's also something slightly reptilian about my brain that makes me numb to the effects of celebrity. And we should talk about this now, because public intellectuals are celebrities in a sense. And the celebrity factor brings with it certain consequences that influence not only the psychology of the public figure, but also their audience. We often see common signs of an emergent process begin to take shape whenever human beings experience wide exposure to their activities, whether they be intellectual, creative, or otherwise. And with that wide exposure and affirmation from an audience comes some quite predictable responses in behaviour. In the public figure, we might see narcissistic tendencies, delusions of grandeur, overcompensatory behaviour, messiah complexes, and also hypersensitivity to criticism. And this isn't something unique to public intellectuals or celebrities, because it's actually a part of human nature. Beneath the personas that we show to the world, human beings are deeply sensitive and vulnerable creatures. This originates out of our biological and psychological complexity. We possess the ability to abstract and can consider the facets of our own existence, awarding our life with a dualism that is both unnerving as it is fascinating. However, despite our deep sensitivity and cognitive prowess, we cannot fully comprehend the totality of our experience. This becomes interpreted as a threat response, so we create bulwarks between ourselves and the image of the world that unsettles us. We create barricades of hubris and reassuring sentiments that shield us from the unsettling reality that we don't have the world figured out, and that somewhere, in a remote part of our minds, we are vulnerable and afraid. I've spoken about this in a previous video where I called it the primordial anxiety. A consequence of all this means that human beings become deeply vain and prideful creatures. These traits emerge out of our insecurity towards existence and facilitate a stance towards it that makes us feel undeservedly secure. We get a small taste of our own competence and take it as a sign of our worth over others. We fall easily to flattery and become addicted to it, especially in the age of social media, which is the greatest incubator of human narcissism ever invented. This is all connected at the deepest level to the primordial anxiety. We have to constantly convince ourselves of our own value, even if that means exaggerating the reality of things. Life becomes an eternal procession of self-coronation. I am the rational one, the beautiful one, the intelligent one, the adored one, the creative one. I am a condensation of my ability, abstracted from the deeper reality that I am a flawed and vulnerable creature. And intellectuals are not immune from these effects at all. In fact, they fall out of a competence with abstraction and their ability to translate those abstractions into graceful outpourings of language that hypnotize both speaker and audience. Like I said, human beings are flawed creatures, and they're also very easily impressed by such demonstrations of competence. People with a high verbal agility, such as public intellectuals, are serenaded by their audiences into believing that they're something special, and that they are on some special quest to expunge the world from darkness using their great powers of reason and sophisticated language. But this is a narcissistic trap, because the public intellectual is only influential within their own sphere of influence, the people who come to their talks, listen to their interviews, and buy their books. With or without them, the world keeps on turning. And their audiences play into this trap. In the audiences of a public intellectual, we often see signs of idealization, groupthink, and hostility towards people who speak about the intellectual in a critical light. This is especially telling because the audiences believe that they're on their own personal quest of self-discovery, and they are in a way. I don't mean to put that down. What I'm really trying to hone in on here are the psychological dangers of becoming too enamored by flawed human beings. The biggest problem stems from how we caricature people in the public space, almost as two-dimensional representations as what they really are. This goes for artists just as it does for intellectuals. We see these people not as the complex, flawed, and dynamic creatures that they really are, but as ambassadors for the ideas that we have embraced. We carry their image in our nervous systems like invisible friends, and sometimes speak about them as if we know them. We enter into a relationship with the image of the intellectual through the ideas that they use to captivate us, and once that image becomes personal, we defend it as a matter of personal significance. This all grows out of this unconscious relationship with ideas and those who espouse them. And ironically, the biggest thing that we could say about all of this is that it goes against the entire point of listening to such people in the first place, because these kinds of relationship are not conducive towards self-education or self-knowledge. In reality, they are the quagmires that asphyxiate our development, because under the intoxicating effects of our infatuation, our perception narrows down, and it's no longer the ideas that are important. It becomes about our attachment to a false image of them that we've become psychologically attached to. So we see a lot of the same psychological behaviour that we typically find in the entertainment industry in these types of figures as well. It goes to show that far from being removed from the petty follies of the creative world, those who court the realm of ideas are just as vulnerable to these kind of traps, because the underlying qualities inherent in human nature are always there to facilitate them. I'm going to conclude by speaking about the constraints to our self-development that can arise when our infatuation with the worldview of other people goes unexamined. In the landscape of ideas, nothing is innocent, because the inevitable contact with human psychology will always mean that ideas are transmitted with underlying consequences that are not immediately obvious to the audiences receiving them. This is especially important because these public intellectuals are selling us on their own perspectives as much as they might be introducing us to interesting concepts. Public intellectuals want to convince us not only that these ideas have validity to them, but that the way that they have grown to relate to them is also valid. It's an admixture of exposition and personal perception. And a problem that can arise from this is where, out of our own laziness, we simply allow public intellectuals to carry the burden of responsibility for the ownership of our relationship to information. After all, they are so remarkably intelligent and articulate, so why not let them do all the hard work for us? Why bother trying to read the volumes of Carl Jung when we can simply watch a 2-hour video lecture where Jordan Peterson lays it out for us? Why bother researching into whether a morality based on science would be a benefit when Sam Harris can simply spin a yarn and we can mistranslate his grace with the English language as an indication of its soundness? Well, I've indicated the problem in both of these examples. As valuable as video material is, it simply can't capture the density and richness of the written form. And a side effect of the video format is that because we can see another human being relaying the information to us, we have the tendency to personalize the interaction, which can lead to us being convinced by the way that things are said, as opposed to the substance behind what's being said. Another unfortunate consequence that stems from this is that many of these cultural figureheads act as bulwarks, not bridgeways, to the fields of information that exist beyond the limits of their personal idea space. The fact that many of these individuals occasionally name-drop important people from philosophy to science to the arts is worth mentioning. I'm sure that many people are now attempting to read Jung or Dostoevsky than if Jordan Peterson hadn't done such a good job at promoting them. So that would seem to have contradicted my point, right? Well, not quite. You see, as much as popular figureheads do frequently advertise important concepts as part of their dialogue with the public, the way that this information is carried over and the existence of hidden agendas complicates the picture somewhat. An essential feature of information in nature is replication. Ideas like cells need to replicate in order to advance their own systems. As extensions of nature, human beings such as public intellectuals want you to be interested in their ideas, so that you'll continue to buy their books. But most of all, they want you to see the world through their eyes. They want to replicate their perspective inside you. Information never transmits innocently. It always motivates towards a replication strategy, and often contains the biases, prejudices, shortcomings, and insights that are carried over from the one transmitting them. And this is problematic because we don't know whether or not the person speaking about a stimulating topic is ideologically motivated. Does a rationalist type like Sam Harris want you to be interested in science out of a genuine concern for your intellectual development or to help the field of science to prosper? Or is he selling you on the optimism of scientific reliability so that you'll be encouraged to adopt his post-Enlightenment worldview? How much of Jordan Peterson's renderings of Carl Jung's ideas remain obedient to what Jung actually wrote about them? And how much is Jordan's personal interpretation playing into the picture? If we hadn't read the material, how are we to know? Over the years, I've gradually conditioned myself to resist the easier path and allow popular figureheads to tell me how it is, and instead I retreat into the challenges and density of books. This isn't especially easy for me, because I'm a visually attenuated thinker and therefore video always yields a more attractive gateway for me, so I have to create a healthy dynamic between these different types of media, because my experience tells me that I'll always get more from books. Granted, it takes longer, it demands more brain power, and I always get lazy. But the thing is, I know that I'll always grow from that experience more than if I simply fire up a podcast. This also cascades into my creative projects because after my brain has been stimulated through exertion, my unconscious releases spring after spring of new material that goes on to inform the nature of my art. A big part of the reason why new media like video suffers is because our interaction with it is facilitated by the same interface that we reserve for popular entertainment, and so the same issues of passivity and short attention spans frequent in this media type. In all my years of reading and simultaneously watching countless hours of video content, I can honestly say all the prominent things that I actually remember have come from books. It wasn't because the video information wasn't stimulating or that the speaker wasn't engaging. It was for the simple reason that the video footage wasn't forcing me to concentrate, and the fact that these speakers had undergone a conditioning process that I wasn't engaging with. I am aware of the irony of an artist vlogger of all people pointing this out through precisely the same medium that's being criticised. However, I consider my task first and foremost to be a task of initiation. Almost all of my videos are tailored to be like micro-essays that will potentially stimulate people to further their understanding of these subjects in their own free time. Naturally, my own biases, shortcomings and prejudices are inevitably cast in here too, and it's simply up to the audience to make of that what they will. All I can say is, don't let other people's limits become your own. I truly hope that what comes out of this reflection isn't to suggest that I'm cynically bashing on cultural figureheads. I simply wanted to highlight the importance of being conscientious when dealing with highly intelligent and articulate people, and understand that simply because we have all of this new media doesn't mean that old media has gone away. If we are at the centre of an information revolution, then it's essential that we become attenuated to the psychological relationship we share with information and the people who espouse it. And so that's really all I wanted to say on this topic. I'm very much looking forward to getting back into the typical XELASOMA subjects, and I'll be working on a new archetype video straight away after this. So with that, I'll simply say thank you very much for watching, and as usual, I'll see you again.